Hi, everybody. This is Plan B. This is in case my internet doesn't work. I'm recording a version of the talk for you. Um, the I'm basically hotspotting from my phone because haven't managed to get broadband yet. I've just moved last week to Sweden, and I don't have broadband yet. And also that explains why it's very dark and also a bit echoey because I'm in kind of basically in an empty house. Um, Hope that you'll forgive all of those things. For those of you who have seen this talk, this is a talk I did at National Bat Conference, but this is not the 12-minute version that I did at National Bat Conference. So it's going to allow me to go into a bit more detail. So there'll be, if you have seen this talk, there'll be stuff that new stuff for you. And then if my internet is playing up, we'll play this video and then I'll stick around. I'll still be online and I'll stick around and be able to answer questions and stuff like that. Hopefully, possibly with my video waffle. We'll see how it goes. So I'm talking to you today about cohabitation. One thing that I will premise this talk with is that usually when I give this talk, I tend to get a lot of people email or message me going, well, I've seen this before. And the thing is that the point of the talk is not to say that it's a rare occurrence that bats cohabit. I'm saying it's an under-recorded phenomenon that for whatever reason, we will see bats come out of a feature, be it in a tree or a building or whatever, and then we just assume that that is the roost. I think that we need to, especially now that we are, rolling out the use of night vision aids as standard in surveys, especially for consultants. I think we may see a lot more of this stuff happening, a lot more records of roosts of this type. But yeah, so I don't think it's rare. I think it's under-recorded, and I think that could potentially be an issue for for conservation. So anyway, on we go. So just to tell you a bit about myself, first, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Morgan. I have for the last I want to say about 16, 17 years, I have worked with the Birmingham Black Country Bat Group in various capacities, but for the most part, as just heading up the kind of like the research that goes on there. So I run a project called the Urban Bat Project, which I'll tell you about in a second. At the moment, I'm working as a postdoctoral researcher in Umeå, Sweden. And that is on a project looking at riparian bats all over Europe. And you'll see in a minute, there's a bit of a theme. Water bats is kind of my thing. I also do some visiting lecturing for the University of Wolverhampton, where I did my PhD, and that was looking at urban bats and how they utilize the canal network in an urban area to get around other aspects of infrastructure. So again, water bats. And then I also work every summer as a volunteer for Operation Wallacea, where I'm the lead scientist and head of the bat research and data collection at Kirker National Park, which is an absolutely stunning area that is a river gorge. And again, the focus of that study is to look at how bats are using in a very arid landscape, how water is very vital to them. And so they're really focused on riparian and lentic habitat, so rivers and ponds. And this project basically was essentially like a side project of my PhD, what you're about to hear about. The woodland that we first discovered this colony cohabiting, or these colonies cohabiting, is just outside of Birmingham, very urban area, a tiny little woodland, one of my study sites for my PhD. And so it just became a bit of a side hustle that's gotten out of control. So just to tell you a little bit about the Urban Bat Project. Urban Bat Project's been running since 2017, I want to say, in Birmingham in the Black Country, just looking at addressing the under-recording in our urban area. And that has been basically comprising bat box checks, advanced surveys, monitoring roosts, and more recently infrared surveys. And I have an amazing group of voluntary tree climbers that come and help look for bats for me in my woodlands in the winter. And we're also doing a ringing scheme, and we're also looking at oral swabbing for volatile chemicals. So lots of stuff going on. It's evolved kind of over the years. But it's yeah, I mean, even though I've moved away, I'm still coming back a lot to do research over there. So it's not stopping by any stretch of the imagination. So I'm going to talk to you about roost sharing. And there are different types of roost sharing. What I will so basically, conspecific means with other colonies of the same species, and interspecific means with colonies of different species. And then it can be time sharing or it can be cohabiting. So cohabiting means is what these are both what they sound like. Cohabiting is using the same roost feature at the same time. Time sharing is using the same roost feature at different times of the year. And as we know, bats move around an awful lot. They use different roosts at different times of the year, but even especially in a woodland environment, there's a lot of roost switching that goes on from tree to tree. And so that, a maternity roost, for example, we use a great number of trees during the season, and they also do what's called fission fusion behavior, which is where they split up into smaller groups and then come back together again, which is a whole other phenomenon and really I find really interesting. But what I'm going to talk to you today about is interspecific cohabitation. So different species sharing a roost feature at the same time. So basically, when this project started, when we found the cohabitation roost, the first thing I did was look at literature and also to look at the battery habitat key to see what had been recorded, to see how rare was this, how weird is it. And you'll see, and I'll talk you through the story about kind of like how we found it and how many bats there were and stuff in a second. But just to give you this baseline data, at the time when I did the search, there were nearly 8,000 records of 1,300 odd features in trees. And of those, there were time sharing records of 498 of those. And 100 of the features experienced time sharing. With cohabitation, there were only 8 records. And even the cohabitation records, the highest number of bats in one of those was 4 bats. Now, I've had, as I said, people tell me about cohabitation, evidence of cohabitation, even in bat boxes and stuff like that, like quite often since. However, I was looking at published records and everything that I could find with evidence of cohabitation was low numbers. So you'll see in a minute that we're not talking low numbers here. And so just to show you, just to get you excited about it, I hope this is it kind of a misleading image because I'll tell you in a minute why this is a misleading image, but there's a nocturnal and Bentons in the aperture of a roost in a beech tree here, right next to each other. This doesn't normally happen. They don't normally come out at the same time. As many of you will know, the emergence time for nocturals is very different from the emergence time of Bentons. But this was post-maternity season, and this was, we believe, a juvenile, and this bat never left the roost. It just hung around in the roost aperture for the nocturnal, I mean. So basically, the Bentons were coming out as normal, and there was still a straggler nocturnal left in the roost, but it's still a cool picture. And you might be thinking this is crazy. Why would in a woodland which especially and as this one is in a woodland with ample features, why would they be cohabiting? Why would they? I mean, even if they like the same stuff, we know for a fact that there's multiple features in this woodland that are used by both groups of bats. So why would they cohabit? So there were lots of questions. So just to tell you the story about how it all happened. I was in Croatia at the time, and I got a message from the Friends of Marian's Wood. Marian's Wood is this beautiful little woodland, as I said, just north of Birmingham by Junction 7 of the M6. It's very small woodland. It's primarily oak and beech. And basically I got this message. If you look at the middle picture, you'll see that there's a stain in the middle of the path underneath this branch. And it wasn't, I basically got this message and I was like, someone needs to go out and have a look at this. Oh, I'm lying, I wasn't in Croatia at this time. My research partner, Scott, and I went out and immediately had a look at this. and you could hear the bats squeaking. We're like, oh, it's probably nocturnes because they do a lot of, a lot of like yakking at each other during the day. And you could smell it, and it was a significant pile of droppings. So we decided to come back and to do an emergent survey. And indeed, we had a number of nodules come out. So this is in 2020. And for the sharp-eyed among you, you'll you'll notice that this was the summer of 2020, and so there wasn't an awful lot that we could do with regard to survey, apart from use our hour of exercise to go out and take a handheld infrared and see if anything was coming out. But that's all that we could do. We were limited to being out for a very short amount of time. It would have looked incredibly suspicious to take a load of kit with us. And so we just recorded the roost and we're like, okay, we'll come back next year and we'll see what the situation is. So a year later, we came back to survey to see if the bats were still in the tree, and the bats were still in the tree. And you'll see these are stills from infrared and from infrared on the left and thermal on the right. And you'll basically see the noctule in the top, and then later on is the Daubenton's coming out, and you can see the size difference in the bats, and you can see that they're quite clearly different species. As a side note, this is an interesting demonstration of the different applications of thermal and infrared. So the thermal, I'll try and play this for you if it will play. So you have thermal, which would give you an incredibly accurate count of bats coming out of a feature, because each give a very strong heat signature. But there's no way that you would have been able to tell that they were different species, and certainly not to get an ID. Whereas the infrared on the left-hand side is quite clear that you can get a species ID from these. You may struggle with the smaller bats, the Daubenton's, but so at the time when we looked at this roost, the first emergent survey, we had 28 noctules and 59 Daubenton's come out. And again, another couple of straggler noctules were still in the roost. It's possible this was pre-birth for noctules, but the Daubenton's, a lot of them were enormous, and so still noticeably pregnant. So our assumption was that this Daubenton's roost at least would get quite a lot larger. So then I was in Croatia this time, and I got a message from the Friends of Marian's Wood again, saying that the roost had come down. It was one of those summer storms, Storm Elver or something like that, I think. And when I found out, I immediately called some of the volunteers from the Urban Bat Project who were licensed and I knew had an endoscope, and I'm like, can you get out to site, go and see if anything's injured and needs taking into care, or if there are any dead bats, or what the situation is. And so they went out and checked it out, and thankfully it looked like the bats had moved on, or they were not there when the actual damage happened. And then basically we met, when I came back the following week, met the rangers who managed the site, and they actually helped us to not only cut up the feature so that we could examine the inside, but to also do a transverse section of the feature. So we had a really good look at the inside, and we were able to measure and catalog the whole thing. And we could see where the areas of staining were, so we knew where each of the bat colonies were within the feature. And then Scott climbed up and inspected what was left on the tree as well. So we got measurements of the whole thing. And this is an illustration of basically what it looked like. I won't go into too much detail, but the main take home is that these X2 and X1 are the places where the droppings were. So you can see that the bats were quite far away from each other. You can look at these details. This has now been published. I'll give you I can direct you to the paper so that you can take your time and have a look at it a bit more. But we rendered all of the images and showed the whole section of the tree, which is pretty cool. But it's a 6-meter feature. One of the things that we did shortly hereafter was we went to the Bats in Trees conference, the ARB conference, and did a talk called Never Underestimate a Roost Feature, because this just looks like a tiny little knothole that is obviously housing a great number of bats and leads to a 6 meter long feature. And then it would be very easy to underestimate. Um, so um, then in the winter, the following winter, we tagged all of the known roosts that we had in the woodland. And we did, I missed a page. Hold on a minute. Sorry about this. I think I'm missing it. So basically, we also, when we wanted to find out what had happened to the bats and where they had gone. And so we spent the rest of that summer looking for the bats. And finding nocturnes is surprisingly easy. You just kind of like show up an hour, half an hour before sunset and walk around, and you don't even need a bat detector. They just do a lot of pre-emergence vocalizations, and they're pretty easy to find. And because of that, we managed to find them. Um, and we'd located the cohabitation roost again in a second tree. And we're just monitoring the numbers, and then come the winter, we are tagging the roosts, all the known roosts in the woodland, which there were a couple more because we'd done some endoscoping in previous years and stuff. So we got measurements of roost two, so we have measurements of both of the main cohabitation roosts, finding desiccating droppings, but basically no bats there during the winter that we could find. Then in 2022, we did an insane amount of surveys, including hand netting, raising little baby harp traps up to the main roosts, where we were able to hand net and capture and measure and ring a lot of the noctules. We weren't ringing the Daubenton's at this time, but basically we had a really intense summer of survey work. So this is, remember the picture at the beginning with the two bats in the aperture? This is that roost, and we loaned a little baby harp trap, and you can see, you can actually even see the different sizes of the bats in there. You can see that they're coming out. It's not a perfect method. A lot of them do evade it, but we did manage to catch over 40 Daubenton's, which we released because we were only processing the nocturals at the time. And we caught 21 jewels, and then we ringed another 4. So this was the start of our ringing scheme at that site. So last year, the first survey of the year, we found another roost. So we had 29 nocturals come out of this this really high up tear out in a new tree, and this was great because we were monitoring it, and then we had 11 come out, including 3 of the ringed females. So we're already starting to see that some of our ringed bats from the summer before or back again. And then we had a single ringed male emerge several days later. You can tell whether they're male or female from which arm the ring is put on. So it's a really good use of IR that you can sort of slow it down and go, oh, does that bat have a ring? Is it left or right? And that gives you an idea. And the more bats we ring, the more information we'll have on the demographics of roosts. So we wondered how this was going on. How, what was the mechanism? How was it working? Why are they doing it? How is it that the nocturals, which are pretty grumpy bats, tolerate the Daubenton's, etc.? And we were wondering whether it was resource partitioning. So we knew that there were 2 ways in which the bats were resource partitioning, which is kind of a fancy way of saying that they were avoiding each other. So they were doing it temporarily, and that we looked at the emergence of the nocturals and then the emergence of the Daubenton's, and they basically were avoiding each other. So there's never a point. So the nocturals come out, then the Daubenton's come out, then the Daubenton's come back, and then the nocturals come back. And so there was never a point where you have to squeeze 59 Daubenton's past 30 nocturals. So do you know what I mean? They kind of managed to avoid each other pretty well. And the other way they avoid each other is spatially. So the nocturals are up here. I'm sorry, the Daubenton's are up here, and the nocturals are up here, and they're 2 meters apart. So interestingly, there is another aperture, but we never saw any bats coming out of that aperture. I have no idea why. Probably the drop zone was a bit better on the other one, less clutter and stuff. But yeah, so the door benders would come all the way down and come out of this one. So we're like, okay, they're avoiding each other. That's how it works. And we wrote up all of our results and we published it in this article, which you can find in the Journal of Bat Research and Conservation website. It's open source, it's accessible to everybody. And we were really happy that this is kind of like we'd recorded this. We've mentioned that it's probably a common feature that's under recorded, and we reckon the mechanism by which it's probably happening is almost certainly resource partitioning. And then earlier 2023, Scott climbed up to look at the new roost, the one that we had the ringed bats come back in. I really hope that this video works for you. And if you have a look in all this sea of Dorbenton's bats, you will hopefully see that there is a bat with a ring on its left arm. So that's a female noctule. And I know it's a noctule without even looking at it, because at the time, if you remember me telling you, we didn't ring our Dorbentons. We started ringing the Dorbentons this year. So we knew that this was another cohabitation roost. So our resource partitioning theory may be may need looking at again. This is the thing about science, isn't it? You think you've got a really good idea, you think you have a plausible explanation for something, and then completely disprove it. Either yourself or someone else does it. So anyway, the research is ongoing. They do keep following each other around. So we have at least 2 maternity colonies. The peak noctule count's 41, the peak Dorbentons count is still 59. And they've been sharing roost features in at least 4 different trees. 3 oak and a beech. Let me think. 2, 3. Yeah, at least 4 different trees. Obviously one of those is no longer a viable roost because it came down in the storm. And they've done this for at least 3 years. We think it's actually, they've been doing this for 4 years. But we don't have any footage or sound files to prove that. Just based on the numbers of bats that came out of a high level feature the year before. But they have moved together from one roost to another together in the same season. So it's not like just opportunistically they've ended up in one tree together. They've literally moved from one roost to another and they've stayed with each other. These colonies are moving together. And they're both using several of the abundant features present. It's a woodland with a lot of woodpeckers, and so there's an awful lot of roost features. So they're spoiled for choice essentially, with suitable features. And we keep finding bats pretty much every time we do a tree climb, and every time we go out there and do a survey, we keep finding new roosts. So, and several of the trees are used year round. So the tree climbing volunteers have found one more roost this year being used for hibernation in a new tree. And then they've found for the 2nd year running hibernating bats in 2 of the trees that were cohabitation roosts in the summer. And some of those bats have had rings on. So we know that some of the bats are staying year round as well. So I mean, it's only going to go the data. Every time we go, we get more data. We're starting to learn a lot more about what's going on and how they're moving around. I need to add this year's new roost, which is sort of here by tree 52. 52 is a new cohab roost. But yeah, so and then the ringing is continuing as well. So the idea is that we've been expanding our bat box scheme to nearby woodlands, and hopefully the bat box scheme will turn up some ringed bats that we have ringed here in myriads, and then we'll get more ideas about larger landscape scale use. And we have a little bit, I again need to update this with this year's data, but these lines are the movements of bats where they've been in tree roosts and where they seem to go to nothing. That's a bat box. So the bats are using the boxes and the trees interchangeably. And the pink lines are females and the blue lines are males. And the volunteers get to name them every time we ring a new bat. So what we want to know is more information about filipatry and roost fidelity. So filipatry is when you come back to the place where you were born. And we'll start to get that information as we recapture bats with rings on that we know that we've ringed during summer captures of the maternity roost, and they were this year's young. So hopefully that will happen this year. But we want to know about roost fidelity. So how much are they coming back to the same roosts? Nocturals are a little strange in that the females have migratory behavior. And so we need to know it'll be really interesting when we start getting the same females coming back through. Interestingly, in this woodland, the bats are in the trees during the summer, but as they come through in March and then again in November, we tend to get them in the bat boxes, and they're not in the woodland and not in the trees so much. So we want to know about roost switching. How often are they doing it? We want to know about fission fusion, like I mentioned before, the splitting up of the roost, and modularity. So modularity is how the size of the groups that they split up into, whether they split up into a few medium-sized groups or many small groups. This is all stuff that we need to do some serious kind of like tagging and telemetry to find out. In the next couple of years while I'm living abroad, we'll be concentrating on the bat box scheme, continuing with the ringing and looking at roost composition with infrared. And then we're looking at chemical signaling in a project with the University of Wolverhampton. So we're looking at how the volatile chemicals contained within the buccal glands of nocturals change. And now that we're ringing the bats, it means that if we recapture the same bat, we can see how much the chemical levels have changed in an individual bat, based on its age and whether it's in what time of the year that it is, and whether it's breeding season or etc. And we'll know a lot more about how that changes with their breeding condition and roost composition. I've got a few theories about nocturals just from anecdotal observations of individuals that we have recaptured in different bat boxes. So we'll see how that all plays out over the next couple of years, really. Just want to thank all of these people who would for work and advice and loan of equipment and various other things, without whom this wouldn't be possible, especially to my research partner, Scott Brown. And that's it. And hopefully you'll have had me deliver this in real time. If not, then we can switch off the video and then I'll be online for you to ask questions. All right. Thanks very much.